Okay. Okay, bonjour, hello, guten Tag, buenos dias, everyone. Welcome to the BCLCA Book Club, Language Acquisition in a Nutshell, a primer for teachers. Number 2 or number 4, I should say. So this is our fourth meeting for chapter 4. And of course, after this, we're very much looking forward. On March 13th, we have Dr. Billivan Patton. And the discussions we've had for chapters 1 to 3, those can now be found as recordings on our little website, where you also have access to these PowerPoints. And you are free to use any of this material how you see fit. So I'm Francie Carlin, and I acknowledge that I'm on the traditional lands of the Secwepemc people in beautiful Kamloops. Michelle.
And I am Michelle Metcalf. I am here on the unceded territory of the Squamish Nation, just off the Capilano River in North Vancouver. And just a reminder of our purpose, we're committed to providing a book club that is engaging, compelling, in fact, inclusive, where everybody has a chance to participate and all ideas are accepted, safe and fun, and finally transformative. And because this is our fourth meeting, we're going to try to focus a little bit more on the transformative end of things. That's the question we'd like to leave you with today. How can your practice be transformed through what we've learned through reading Bill Van Patten's book? And Francie.
Yeah, and our structure is as we've had before. Today, I'm probably going to need those full 20 minutes because we're now summarizing the entire book, pulling it all together. We're going to then break into small groups and come back together to discuss your thoughts and ideas. So let us dive right in. Language acquisition in a nutshell. The goal in the preface, the authors say nothing in here is in any shape or form controversial. This has been long established information, knowledge, and theory about how we acquire languages. Somebody who needs to mute themselves in the background, please. This is not about how or what to teach. Instead, the goal is for teachers to be able to make informed decisions and have realistic expectations of themselves and their students. So in chapter 1, the object of acquisition, the authors made that distinction between language and communication. And we're now really going to dive in again into language. Language, we discussed in depth, is an abstract, complex, implicit mental representation that takes time to build. Each one of those dots will pop up at one point or another, provided there is enough appropriate input. And that word implicit mental representation shows up again in chapter 4, and actually now stands for implicit learning. Implicit learning, implicit mental representation means the same thing in chapter 4. In chapter 2, on ordered development, the authors were saying language develops in an ordered and constrained way. This order is not determined by the curriculum or learners' conscious effort to acquire language. Their conscious effort, their conscious intentions. The frog cannot lose its tail until its hind legs are fully developed. That's when it builds back. Just the same thing in language acquisition and language learning. No matter what we throw at students, if they're not ready, if we're trying to violate that ordered and constrained way, we will be very frustrated. In chapter 3, the basic ingredients of language acquisition, the authors talk about internal ingredients, that language-specific mechanism and that general learning mechanism that is at play when we acquire languages. And the authors also talk about the external ingredients, input, interaction, and disposition. And we talked about that, yes, it is possible to change a student's disposition, their attitude, their beliefs, but it's hard work and it takes time, and we're not always successful. But as educators, where we have access, where we have a say, is in the realm of input and interaction. Input, especially when we make it comprehensible, they understand what is being said. When input is communicatively embedded and we have repetition, 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 while remaining compelling, spellbound, they are there, they are engaged. This is where we have input. We can't really do much about these internal ingredients, and disposition is hard to affect and takes patience and time. But we do have a say when it comes to how we provide input and what kind of interaction we're providing. And that takes us to chapter 4, the centrality of implicit learning. And you may have had that student before who in the first week in September comes to you with a lovely, kind and warm smile on their face and they say, I forgot everything from last year. And we go, why? I provided these amazing worksheets and we had all these amazing activities. What happened? So the author start us off right off the bat saying students may spend a good deal of time trying to learn material explicitly. But when it comes to language acquisition, however, it is increasingly clear that implicit learning plays the primary role. So the authors talk about explicit and implicit learning. So let's go and dive and analyze what that actually means. What is explicit? What is implicit? Explicit knowledge, well, nothing is left to the imagination. And explicit content, we've seen that before, parental advisory, watch out. Nothing is going to be held back. In the classroom, what explicit knowledge looks like is knowledge you can verbalize, either as a student or as a teacher. You can tell them everything there is to know about the passé composé, or how you conjugate, or how to use a star, and etc., etc., etc. It is super explicit, is all spelled out in thick books. Implicit knowledge, on the other hand, you know it when you see it. It's a gut feeling. It's like, oh, do I put a comma here or not? My gut tells me no, the comma is not needed. I've just heard myself the other day say to my students, doesn't that hurt your ears when you put it that way? Oh no, it doesn't. Not yet. It doesn't hurt your ears yet. So implicit knowledge is that gut feeling, that ear feeling we have about the language. It is the language that falls out of our mouths, that falls out of our students' mouths without editing, without holding back and rethinking what comes out of my mouth next. It's simply what the language that is there, what falls out of the mouth, what falls out of the pencil when they write. So, I have a feeling that most of you on this call will say, yeah, this is where we want to be. This is the target. This is where the goal is at. This is what we want from our students, that they can just produce language that's comprehensible, that we understand they are capable communicators. This is what we want for them. However, at least in traditional language teaching, we teach languages like we teach math and science and history. We teach it explicitly. This is where, in traditional teaching, the energy so often goes. And behind that teaching is the assumption that explicit teaching translates over, or to explicit knowledge will eventually translate over to implicit knowledge. Spoiler alert, I'm going to jump to the very end of the chapter and say, actually, that translation, that conversion from explicit knowledge to implicit knowledge does not happen. There is a firewall between these two ways of knowing languages. Explicit knowledge does not become implicit knowledge. But I'm a little bit ahead of myself, so let's go back to closer to the beginning. So we have explicit knowledge, we have implicit knowledge. We'll get back to where we were just at. So how is this knowledge created in the first place? Well, it is created through learning, through explicit learning and implicit learning. So explicit knowledge produces explicit learning. Implicit knowledge produces implicit learning. So explicit learning is a conscious process, usually done with intention. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to get those verbs in the imparfait tonight. I'm going to master them. Implicit learning, on the other hand, also referred to as implicit mental representation, which takes us right back to chapter 1, is the construction of new cognitive structures and behaviors without conscious processes and without intention. We are, in other words, unaware of what we are learning, maybe even that we are learning. And this is, most of you will probably agree, is how we acquire our L1. Not many parents will sit their toddler in front of a board and conjugate verbs with them. Simply interact with them in an appropriate, engaging, compelling, repetitive, communicatively embedded manner. So they eventually acquire their L1, their first language. So the question now becomes, do we acquire our second or additional language implicitly as well? And this is where Van Patten and Simonson refer to the father of the input hypothesis. Dr. Stephen Krashen, who in the 70s and 80s posited, yes, we acquire our first language and all our additional languages implicitly as well. In fact, he said, language acquisition comes from input, not output, from comprehension, not production. In other words, output is a result of input plus comprehension. So when we see a student who is struggling with output, the answer is not to say, here, produce more output. The answer is, oh, I need to produce more input. I need to make sure they understand what's going on. This is how we eventually get output. Output is the fruit. Input plus comprehension is how we get there. So back to chapter 1. Language is an abstract, complex, implicit, mental representation that takes time to build. And now we're adding on top of that. Therefore, it is almost impossible for learning to be largely explicit in nature. So we're back to ordered development, chapter 2. Ordered development is immune to explicit teaching. We know that already. And the authors refer to Pieneman's teachability hypothesis that says we can't make learners do something they are not ready to do naturally. So we're back to that slide. We have that in traditional teaching, we have the assumption that when we have explicit knowledge, eventually, somehow, miraculously, that becomes implicit knowledge. But the authors are adamant and they say, no, those two do not communicate with each other. They are separate systems of knowledge. In other words, there cannot be an interface between explicit knowledge and implicit mental representation. Or put even more shortly, more bluntly, explicit knowledge cannot turn into implicit knowledge. It doesn't work like that. And the authors also acknowledge research on explicit, implicit teaching is fraught with problems, but, and they are summarizing some of that research, explicit instruction results in short-term effects for explicit knowledge. So yeah, if you have an explicit test for them, make sure you teach explicitly. But if you teach explicitly and you want implicit knowledge, you're going to probably run into a lot of frustration because, again, those two systems do not communicate. In addition, explicit teaching and learning can have negative consequences. And lastly, additional language learners can develop native-like knowledge of even highly complex phenomena without receiving instruction. People who learn in L2 without instruction can develop knowledge that is more native-like than the knowledge of people who learn in L2 with instruction. So there's almost like a magic happen. They can do stuff they never really learned. And that's what we see when we provide implicit knowledge and we provide access to implicit learning. So let's summarize 3 slides. We're almost there. I know this is heavy. This is heavy. 3 slides to summarize the book. Language is developed implicitly in our brain based on abstract data from communicatively embedded input. Okay, so again, we have that word implicit, abstract, communicatively embedded. Put another way, communicatively embedded input is the only fuel our brain can process to build language. We can fill learners' brains with lots of explicit rules, but this explicit knowledge is like vinegar in a gas tank. And I'm not a car person, so I actually had to think about and Google what happens if I put vinegar in a gas tank? Well, nothing. The car will not run. Nothing happens. Just like that, our brain also, it will be there and it can be called off or on explicitly, but it will not build implicit knowledge. Summary page 2. The ultimate goal in language acquisition is to develop an implicit language system. So when we go teaching, we are there to help our students develop an implicit language system. The standard assumption should be that implicit learning is central in acquisition and explicit learning plays a limited role. We're not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater, or what they're saying is don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, but we should be teaching from a place that says, I have to provide input that is compelling, communicatively embedded, that is frequent, and that is comprehensible, because implicit learning is central to acquisition. Summary 3. Summary C3 says, yeah, we have these internal mechanisms or ingredients, we have these external ingredients, but where we as educators have a say is when it comes to input and interaction. We make sure they understand what's going on. And when students in my class don't understand what's going on, I say, you know what? If you don't understand what's going on, you're not acquiring language. So everybody stops. We're stopping the class right here. We make sure that you understand what is going on. Every single soul in my classroom. We make sure that it's communicatively embedded, that we have that repetition. Wow, make it compelling. So that is the summary of our book. So we left off with a little bit of pedagogy. And those of you who are already living in the world of comprehensible input and TPRS, this will look very familiar, that input and interaction piece. If you would like to learn more about comprehensible input and TPRS, which Michelle and I believe provide access to that kind of input and that interaction that the authors are describing, we invite you to consider coming to the BCLCA conference. The title of the conference is Transforming the Language Classroom. It will take place on April 25th in New Westminster. It's a Friday and it's a full day. Our keynote speaker is the incredible Dr. Catherine Michelle. She is here from the Kamloops area, and she is talking about restoring our languages through TPRS. Dr. Catherine Michelle founded a school in Chase, so just 45 minutes from Kamloops, for Indigenous students in which they learn and relearn their Indigenous language, Secwepemctsín. And every summer, Dr. Catherine Michelle has 60 Indigenous language teachers from across BC come to her summer school. And Anne LaRoche and myself have both attended that school for a week. And she teaches TPRS, Comprehensible Input, TPR. She uses these methods and she has done so for 20, 30 years, long before I even heard about this. She's been doing this for literally for decades, transforming language acquisition in her community. So she's our keynote. She will also have a breakout session. In addition, session C, Michelle, Adriana Ramirez, and myself will be offering this little panel from theory to practice, our journeys of transforming language teaching through comprehensible input. And we will each share our journey of how we went from, loving to love conjugating verbs. Okay. I love conjugating verbs. How I went from that to doing a lot less of that and providing a lot more comprehensible input to my students. So we each will share our journey from traditional language teaching to a teaching that is compatible with language acquisition. And that will happen at this conference as well. The conference is $225, but for the first 25 people who register, they get their registration fee for free. So a bursary is available for the first 25. Earlier this week, there were about 9 spots left, 9 bursaries left. So if that is of interest to you, I really encourage you to get registered as soon as possible. All right. Our discussion, like before, appoint somebody to be the leader who facilitates the discussion, somebody who keeps an eye on time so everyone gets equal airtime, and one person can be appointed as the person who reports back any group highlights or insights. And I have no idea where our time is at, so we'll talk about time in just an instant. Voila. Okay. Now, for the questions, last time you had, a dozen questions. This time, 3. Easy. As Michelle hinted at, this is about, we're going to have conversations today that hopefully transform. So, question number 1, reflecting on your current practice. How does your teaching align with what you have learned as a result of your reading and the conversations in this book club? 2, going forward, what changes can you make in your practice so that it aligns more closely with the ideas presented by Van Patten and Simonson? And just a little hint, when Michelle and Adriana and I will share our stories at the BCLCA conference, none of us made that transition in a semester, a month, a week, even a year. All of us, it took us multiple years to make that transition. So be patient with yourself. That would be my one word here. And lastly, what questions and wonderings might you have for Dr. Bill? Because he will be addressing us on March 13th. Compile your questions in an email and send it to, and that's my email address, languagecoordinator@sd73.bc.ca. I invite you to take a quick picture with your cell phones of these questions, and then I will put you into your discussion groups.
And the time, Francie?
Yes, so what time is it now, Michelle?
It is 3:55.
55. Want to go till 5:15? So that gives us 15 minutes.
4:15.
450, of course. Yeah, thank you. Okay, now I need to know 18.
4:15. Okay, perfect.
Great.
Sorry to
I'm,
cut you off, but
yes.
language coordinator, your email address, is it supposed to be LANGUAGE?
No,
Oh,
it's never is. Um,
Okay.
Lang,
Langouge.
there. I can never ever spell that word correctly.
No
Thank
worries.
you.
I just wanted to make sure.
Yep,
Thanks.
appreciate it. Thank you. Very good, Burns. There we go. There we go. And you're off to the races. That's because I didn't join.
Hey, Frenzy, can you hear me? It's loose.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can.
Yeah, somehow I got kicked out of the compute my computer.
Okay, no
So
problem.
I'm on my phone.
Okay, I can put you into a group. There we go.
Okay.
Mais je suis pas sûre.
Définition. Quelle est la définition?
Alors, je suis plus sûre. Après vous avoir écouté, je sais pas du tout, mais pour explicite, c'est parler de la langue, c'est l'expliquer. Puis implicite, ça vient après avoir eu de l'expérience dans la langue. C'est quoi l'expression? C'est un peu comme whole language contre la phonétique, à mon avis. Et puis, je ne sais pas ce que vous devriez faire en immersion non plus, parce que comme j'ai parlé avec pas un stagiaire, une étudiante de Bill Van Patten. On a parlé de la grammaire, puis parlé de la conjugaison, est-ce qu'il faut... puis elle a dit qu'il ne faut pas le faire jusqu'à ce que les élèves aient un certain niveau de langue. Puis à un certain point, ils sont prêts à avoir des explications sur la conjugaison, à faire des conjugaisons, parce qu'à ce point-là, ils se posent déjà des questions là-dessus, mais on veut pas commencer.
On veut pas commencer avec les techniques avant de montrer comment c'est utilisé.
C'est ça.
Alors, c'est comme montrer comment on parle, puis là, ils vont se dire, ah, ben, t'as dit, je répondrai. Puis cette personne-là a dit, tu répondras. Pourquoi est-ce que c'est rare et ré? Puis là, ils vont commencer à se poser des questions, ils vont avoir des patrons, voir c'est eux autres qui vont s'en rendre compte. Alors, c'est comme par l'inverse. Je comprends ce que tu dis.
Mais c'est ce
Parce que
qu'on
j'en
fait
suis même
aussi.
pas sûre. Mais aussi, on commence, c'est vraiment des débutants chez moi, puis c'est de la répétition, et puis c'est les mots à haute fréquence aussi. Et puis on veut pas limiter les conjugaisons des verbes, on veut limiter le vocabulaire, mais il y a un mélange entre le vocabulaire, puis les structures, puis la grammaire, mais je ne sais pas comment l'expliquer. Puis il reste 53 secondes.
Et merci.
Ouais.
Merci à vous.
Merci.
OK, au revoir.
Bon, on va voir si je peux me rejoindre ici.
Recording in progress.
Je vais faire glisser. Je-
Michelle, you're back. Perfect.
Bye.
Michelle, for the debrief.
Okay. Did you want me to get a debrief going here, Francie? Is that my job? Or do you want to do it? I'm happy to go ahead and do it. Okay. Let's begin with question number 1. Any insights, aha moments related to the alignment of our current practice with what we've learned from the book itself? Would you like to start? I hear a dog barking.
I'm happy to share.
Thank you. Please go ahead. Who's that? Stephanie.
Brenda.
Oh, Brenda. Sorry. Oh, there you are, Brenda. Sorry, I was looking in the top right corner. Hey.
So there were a lot of similarities with my group. So well, Tracy and I had Tracy and Hélène in the group, and they're both French immersion background, teaching in elementary, but just a lot of exposure that we've kind of all had to more implicit learning, And just thinking back to maybe how we were taught Spanish in high school and to how much that's changed over the years. And I think of I was doing really well in high school Spanish, but it was more explicit learning. And then when it came to university, I was not doing so well because, I didn't have enough of that exposure, but it was work afterwards. And, being more exposed to the language and through travel and more learning that involved more of the implicit learning that helped me gain that confidence in speaking more.
Right.
And so also that's that experience of being a teacher that had kind of more emphasis on, just grammar heavy, base to how I used to teach to now being more CI. It's just really impressive to see how much kids can stay in the target language and speak more confidently using the language. Yeah. And their writing is better as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, providing that scaffolded input is so critical. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thanks, Brenda. Sorry, I was looking, I saw Stephanie's light up and then I thought it was you, but then
No worries. Yeah.
there you are.
I'd
Anybody
love to
else?
add on to that, but
Yeah,
my
please.
video's not working. I apologize. So we are talking about how Bill reflected on how we actually learn language. And he was saying that if you actually look back, most of his implicit learning was outside of the classroom when he had real interactions with speakers. And we reflected that we kind of learned in the same way. So I was never a French immersion student, but I took opportunities when it was possible to travel to Quebec or to travel to, I went to Belgium for a term in university. And I found that that is when I actually picked up the language rather than when I was in the classroom. And I also wanted to reflect on the difference between the methods of my Spanish program and my French program in high school. My French program was very traditional. It was like memorize the tenses and the vocab, and even if we had a conversation, it was memorize it, write it down, and present it. Versus my Spanish class, where the teacher gave us a topic, and we ended up doing bullfighting. And so it was very cultural. It was very engaging. It was very good for the students because they got involved, and they had to decide, well, this is the side that I want to debate on. And so there was more of that, in the first chapters where Bill Van Patten was talking about there has to be engagement of the learner in what they are speaking, or else they're not going to learn it. I think that's what I have. Oh, and then we talked about one other thing where we said that we understand that there's no bridge or mechanism to bring that explicit knowledge into implicit knowledge. But as teachers, we kind of like having that idea of, well, why does it sound wrong? And then we talked about how that leads to conversations about different cases in language. We talked specifically about le qui, whereas it sounds like it should be an apostrophe and the H should be silent, but it just doesn't sound right. And so why is it le qui and not le qui? To have those examples when students ask, well, why isn't that right? We do like explaining or knowing why that rule is the case. So maybe not using it as instruction, but having that in our back pocket so that we can share it out.
Gives you a chance to be the teacher on that point and notice their curiosity about the language, because language is really very interesting, especially at that level. I'd just like to comment about something that I think both Brenda and that was Tracy, right? Just speaking about the fact that how we acquired language or learned language, the fact that we had experiences outside of the classroom, traveling or living in another country, and the fact that a lot of the traditional ways of teaching, it was not understood. The process for language to be acquired. And so the traditional methods, even though we know that our students will, if they have the disposition to travel and be curious about the language and watch the Netflix series or watch movies outside of the classroom, that they will improve. But I think now we have methods, we have methodologies that align with a comprehensible input focus. And therefore, those traditional practices, we have to really look hard at them, because we didn't know. So when we know better, we do better, right? And that the fact that we didn't understand the process in previous decades or years past. So now we have this understanding. I guess that because we don't have very much time, 8 minutes, maybe we can look at question number 2. So what can we look at in our own practice to make changes going forward to align with the ideas that Bill Van Patten has presented with his colleague here? Any comments on moving forward? How can we provide more comprehensible input in the classroom? If we know that comprehensible input is the key to acquisition, how can we provide that for our learners? How can we give them opportunities to interact with that input? I think really that's the sort of critical question.
One can bring people in. So in my grade 12 last semester, I decided to get them to have interviews with real community members. So I brought community members from the French Center to come in my class, and the kids had to prepare for an authentic interview, and therefore they were really more engaged, and they went in there with a kind of a creative type emploi job opening. And that was really interesting because the kids really got into it, and they got really engaged, and they had to get the vocabulary to discuss it. But
that's kind of like what Tracy was saying too, was that when there's a communicative purpose, they're going to be more likely to move forward in their language acquisition. But how do we actually provide the input? Because I think those are sort of output activities. So how do we provide the language that gets into their head? How does that happen in our classroom? Because I think there's been traditionally a focus on output. We measure our success through the output, but we don't spend enough time assessing what has been comprehended. Nicole.
Well, I'm trying to increase my reading program.
Mm-hmm.
So giving them more time and sticking with it for in-class reading. And of course, the younger they are, like grade 9s, we just do 8 minutes twice a week. And hopefully we'll increase by June a little bit more. And my grade 10s, they have a little bit more time. My, 11s and 12s, they have more time. But I'm really trying to focus this year on that free reading time and for them to choose books that interest them. So that's an input that I'm trying to increase, that it's not just me, but different.
That's awesome, because Krashen would also back that up by saying that reading is the #1 way to build vocabulary through reading, because that is a concentrated source of input. So fantastic way of providing additional input.
Yeah.
Any other ideas? Yes, we have Lee. Hi, Lee.
Yeah. Hi, sorry, I said my camera's not working. Last time my microphone wasn't working, and now it's my camera. But here we are. Also, like through music, and like just it's been mentioned a few times, but like authentic French, whether it's through film or through they seem like series and like the Manie Musicale. I think like hearing those songs and coming from all different French-speaking countries, like not just traditionally France or Quebec, I think that's really helpful as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's time for Mani Musical and Locura de Marzo, so it's a great way to celebrate the language and learn about culture at the same time through that input. For me, storytelling has been the primary source of input, especially at the lower levels. That allows me to stay in the target language for 90% of my class as I scaffold that sort of sense of immersion through the different levels. So if anybody is interested in providing additional input, if not through reading, then storytelling, TPRS specifically, would be a fantastic way to investigate the ways that you can provide that extra input. Because if we don't have the input, we're going to have output that is not it's more like language-like behavior rather than true language acquisition. Francie, I'm calling on you to call time here. It's 4:27 on my computer. Is there time for another comment or two before we wrap up?
I
You're
noticed that
muted.
Jen had her hand up earlier.
And there's Jen. Hi, Jen.
Hi, so I just figured out how to do the raise my hand.
And I just saw it.
I just figured it out. I just wanted to jump back. Our group, we didn't get to question two, but we had a really healthy, really great conversation. Just that difference between the immersion experience and then the core experience, whether it's French or Spanish, and just really targeting that time that you have in the language is so. I mean, we all know this, but it's so valuable to make sure that you're making use of that time. And you were just talking about the, just the TPRS. Just it incorporates the stories. It's got that repetition. There's some internal motivation there. And so especially when you've only got your students for an hour in the high school context versus, let's say, the immersion context in elementary school, it's just that every opportunity counts.
Absolutely. Every minute counts. So how do we leverage every single moment in the classroom to provide that input? So thanks for that, Jen. Am I missing anybody else who wanted to speak or comment or anything any sort of reflection? Francie, over to you.
Thank you. So good, so good. Oh my goodness. And of course, just want to add a little bit with the stories, of course, that's a way of indigenizing our French teaching. If we use stories, because stories is a very much in I cannot think of an indigenous culture that doesn't have stories. So for me, that's very compatible. All right, wrapping it up. So again, this is our little website. You can link to it through the BCLCA website as well, where you have the links, you have everything you need, and most importantly, you can watch the videos from now all of our 4 sessions. And we shall meet again on Thursday, March 13th, and we will have Dr. Bill, the self-appointed diva of language acquisition, on the call. And Michelle, you've heard him speak many times. I haven't had the pleasure yet, but from what Michelle is saying, he's super engaging, super entertaining, just so much fun and incredible.
He sings as well.
Yeah. And so please, if you have questions for Bill, that he will give a little talk and then we'll open it up for questions. Get your questions to me by March 7. If your group came up with questions today, just fire them off. You don't need to, put anything pretty language in it. Just fire off the questions or wonderings or yeah buts that your group may have come up with. But March 7 is the latest for this to be sent to me. And that's it for today. Adios, auf Wiedersehen. Merci beaucoup. And we shall meet again, hopefully, on March 13th with Dr. Bill. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everyone, for showing up and contributing. It means so much.
Thank you.
Go, Canada, go.
You betcha.
I now know what you're talking about.
I briefed you.
Come on over. We'll show you.
Very good.
How can you not know this and live in Kamloops, honestly?
It's the bubble.
Oh my gosh.
I know, God. But I mean, anyway, it's all good. I will follow. I will follow. Thank you, and have
I
a good
also
night.
watch a YouTube reel tomorrow.
Sorry, what did you say?
Hockey. I said I don't care about hockey, but I know that it will connect me with my students. So I will either get the highlights from my husband and my daughter, or I will watch a YouTube reel on my way to work tomorrow. Well, you know what I mean.
That's sacrilegious. This is the game of the century.
I want to be there, but it might be
Oh no,
over
you've
by
got
the
your
time our
class.
meetings
Yeah.
are done. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've got a class followed by our last travel meeting. So,
Okay. Okay. Well, you two
okay,
take
take care,
care.
Michelle. Get
We'll
better.
talk soon. And
Yeah.
thanks, Francie, for everything.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I think we took it
Sorry.
home.
Okay.
Ciao, good night.
Ciao, ciao.